Hey, what's up, everybody? In this video, we're going to be talking about simplifying our turn probe strategy. So I chose to start off with this spot because I think it's probably the most important node in the whole idea of increasing our precision for turn and river play. So the reason why I use the word precision is that everybody wants to talk about finding good bluffs or going for max value or different parts of your range. But if we really want to have high precision on turns and rivers, we need to focus on our global frequencies and then our hand types from there, just to build good, robust ranges over and over and over. I know Aram Zobian's going to focus on exploits. Brock Wilson's going to be talking about defending against these things. So those guys are going to be a bit more on how we can adjust that based on player types and facing aggression. But what I want to focus on for my section really is that how can we increase our precision? How can we be as precise as possible, building extremely difficult to play against ranges on turns and rivers? Because that's where the money's made. When the pot is big on turns and rivers, if we can be more precise than our opponents, I think it's one of the biggest areas where we can develop an edge. And it all starts, to me, with turn probes. Turn probes are, say you're in the big blind and flop goes check, check, and then the turn comes. So you're playing against a check back range from our opponents here. And it's not like on flops, where on flops when we're defending against aggression or we're just c-betting, things are a bit more natural, I would say. Like when you are in position as the pre-flop raiser, you get boards that are great for you and you c-bet. When you're defending against them, you build strategies based on their c-bet frequency, etc. But after the check-check node, and we start to probe the turn, our strategies are much more dynamic. Different turns and different flops can heavily change our strategies in these spots, and so I want to spend more time talking about it and finding edges throughout this node. So the key word here too is simplification. So there's infinite variables that are at play here, but what we really want to do is figure out how can we simplify this to execute very precise strategies in real life. And so I want to start this off with global frequencies. I pulled this graphic from John Little's Tournament Masterclass. I think that it's an awesome graphic. Essentially, what's happening here is that we have two things to figure out on the turn here, right? We have our frequency of how much we're betting and our size that we're choosing to bet. And so, as you can see through the graphic, when we have a really bad flop and a very bad turn, we need to very rarely bet. And that's going to scale all the way across to when we have a great flop and a great turn in the turn probe spot, which we're going to bet at an extremely high frequency. So we want to think about our frequencies as a bit of a scale, taking into account how good the flop is for you. Here is written OOP range disadvantage, right? If we were at a strong range disadvantage, that means that we have very little equity on the flop and the opponent has a high range advantage. And then how good the turn is for us, that's going to be in terms of equity as well. And as you can see through the box, if you have a bad flop and a good turn, you can sometimes overbet, sometimes use a large bet size, and then it's going to scale all the way to when it's a good flop, good turn, where we're just betting at a very high frequencies and using smaller sizes. So what I want to say about developing our sizes here is that you want to focus on your asymmetries in your range. Where is our advantage? When it goes check, check, is it a spot where our advantage is in our nutted region and we're going to lead to bigger sizes? Or is our advantage going to be in the equity of our range, where we have more single pair hands, more less air than our opponent, and so we use more small sizes? Typically, those are going to be the two pillars, and then there's plenty of spots that we're going to see with multiple asymmetries. Say you have a portion of your range that's more nutted than your opponent, as well as more single pair type hands, that's going to lead to multiple sizes. So by kind of having this simplification and this mindset around it, it's going to allow us to understand how often to bet, what size to use, and how many sizes to use. And if we can get that right, everything else is going to kind of work itself out. So global frequencies to me are by far what's most important on turns and rivers, and understanding how aggressive we can be in certain lines. Now, once we get that global frequency kind of set up in our head of how we want to play the spot, then it comes down to our hand selection. Now, anybody can look at a nutted hand and be like, okay, I should probably either check raise his hand or put money in the pot with this hand. But if we think about global frequencies like a scale again, right? If we realize that that we're betting at a very high frequency, that means that we're reaching into weaker hand types, right? And that's what causes the smaller size on average. Whereas when we have to be quite polar, then we're only choosing a small portion of our range to develop bets with. So if you understand your global frequency, and you know that you want to be betting your premium hands for the most part, that's going to allow you to figure out what kind of draws to bet and what kind of other hand types to pull from. So the most important thing about betting a non-value hand in the turn probe node is that we need to be very equity driven. When we're out of position, especially at deeper stacks, we can't just bet because we have 5 high and we want the opponent to fold. It's not a good enough reason. It's not precise enough, right? We need to be very equity driven, meaning that we have some sort of draw to hopefully a nutted hand or to a strong hand that's going to allow us to bet on the river for value. We're betting the turn with typically more bluffs than value, with the understanding that some of those bluffs become value hands on the river, allowing us to develop more river aggression. So if you can imagine, once again, like this global frequency on a scale, as you bet more and more often, you have to choose and dip into weaker value hands and weaker bluff candidates. And so as that scale moves back and forth, when you're not betting very often, you need to choose some of your best bluffing candidates. So your best bluffing candidates are going to be hands like that have that immediate equity. And then as you get weaker and weaker, you can imagine it might look like a single overcard with a potential river blocker on a certain draw that completes, right? It's like we're reaching further away from a really good bluffing candidate on the turn to a more mediocre bluffing candidate on the turn, all based on our global frequency and how much more we should bet. So let's see this in action a bit and hope to kind of glean some concepts. So let's start with the kind of bad section. So a bad flop. Let's go with under the gun at 40 big blinds versus the big blind, and let's give an ace jack 5 rainbow. I think rainbow. No, that's not rainbow. Ace jack 5 rainbow. There we go. So this is like an awful board for us, right? We have 33% equity as the out of position player, and the in position player should be incredibly aggressive on this flop, right? And what we see most of the time is a bet. And so what happens in these spots when they check, for a long time I was misplaying this spot and thinking that I could develop a ton of aggression. But the issue is this is like the worst board, the worst flop in the deck for us. And the reason why they can bet a ton is because they have so many strong hands. So when it goes check, if we look at like a mediocre to bad turn for us, let's say like a 10, right? We're just going to actually check our entire range because we still just have this massive equity disadvantage. Now, so this would fit into the category, okay, the flop is bad for us and the turn is bad for us. That's going to scale our global frequency down to 0, and we're playing a very high check frequency. We're going to develop a check raise strategy facing a bet. Now, as the turn, so we're going to stick with the same flop. It's a bad flop every time. But as this turn gets better and better for us, what does that mean? Well, it means that the turn brings us more nutted hands, right? It allows us to develop an asymmetry in our range that we're going to be aggressive on. So let's look at like a 2 of spades. So as you can see, like a 2 of spades, we have deuces, 5s, deuce 5, ace, deuce, ace 5, ace jack. We all of a sudden on the deuce spade have like somewhat of an asymmetry with nutted hands. So even though we're at a massive equity disadvantage here, still at 35%, we can develop some aggression due to our asymmetry in the high end of our range, right? We have more nutted hands than our opponent. That allows us to develop aggression. And so as you can see, we have bad flop, good turn, high check frequency, and when we bet large. So this is the simplification. That's step 1, right? And then once we get to this spot, we're like, okay, let's bet 20 to 30% of our range for a large size on the turn. Well, now we go down to hand type, okay? So we pick our best made hands, which in this spot is going to be a mix of obviously like the deuces, 5s, deuce 5, ace, deuce, ace 5, and then plenty of single pair ace X that are relatively strong. All right, so that stuff's all quite reasonable to grab from. And then our hand choice, like we talked about, we need to be equity driven in these spots. So when we're equity driven in these spots and our global frequency isn't high, we're at 30% bets, right? So when we're at 30% bets, this means that we need to choose quite good candidates to bluff with. And so those candidates are going to, the first ones that for me to come to mind is a 3 and 4 in my hand and spades. Those are my best candidates in this kind of situation to develop aggression. And that's what we're going to see. You know what's a fun one here is this queen 3, queen 4. Specifically the queen, because we have an overcard to their jack X. When we bet the turn, their most common continue is going to be a jack. So having an overcard gives us just that little bit more amount of equity against their continuing range. So if we look at our 3s and 4s, we're betting at a very high frequency. All of this region are just spade draws, right? If we just click spades here, look at how aggressive we're being with our spade draws. This is because this is some of our highest equity hands that are going to be some of our best bluffing candidates. We're going to see a little bit of queen 10, king 10, king queen. A little more often than not, we're going to have a spade in it. These are now going to fall like if we're ranking our hand choices here essentially. Like the best hand is going to be a hand like queen 3 of spades, queen 4 of spades in terms of its properties to want to bet. And then as we get weaker and weaker, then I feel like in my head I'm getting to the point of like, okay, well I have like queen 10 with a spade, king 10 with a spade. These are reasonable bets. They're not quite as good as some of the ones with better properties. But that's how we're going to build our range. So we see this is the bad board with the bad turn, pure check. Now we get a turn where we develop some asymmetries and we can find some amount of bets. Let's look at a similar spot like a 6 of spades. So on the 6 of spades, it's the same kind of thing, right? It's like it's almost the exact same. We don't turn straights now, but we still have this like similar kind of 2 pair. We turn sets, we turn offsuit 2 pairs. So we turn like this region of hands that can develop aggression. And when that's the case, we're going to have, so once again, we have bad flop, medium turn, small amount of betting for the polar size, okay? So that's global frequency. And then hand choice, same kind of thing. We're polling all of our value hands for the most part. And then what are going to be good bluff candidates here? Well, good bluff candidates here, once again, going to be spades. Watch, look at all this green. When we go spades, we are extremely heavy bet with the spade draw in our hand, right? What else is going to be good here? Straight draws. Deuce 4, deuce 3, 3 4, 7 3, 7 4, 8 4, right? This is going to be so consistent across all spots, and this is really how we can develop precision. Is the understanding the concepts behind this, starting with the global frequency from our simplification method, and then pulling good hand types, and we're going to play really good turn probe strategies. So that was a bad flop. Let's go to a more mediocre flop, and I'll go a bit shorter stacked. Let's go low jack versus big blind on 9-6-4 rainbow. Okay, so as you can see, now we have 44% equity. So we went from having 33 in the 40 big blind ace jack X spot to now on 9-6-4 having a real share of equity in the pot, right? And so what that's going to lead to, just to cover the flop quickly, is a medium check frequency from the opponent. So compared to the ace jack 5 where they were checking almost never, now the imposition players are actually developing a real checking range, 43%, very, very high amount of checks. And if you see how the overpairs play, you can imagine that the opponent's going to be quite aggressive with their good 9x and overpairs. And so when it goes check check, now this is going to lead us into some situations that are quite good for us. So now we're like, I would say, a medium flop. It's not the best flop in the world for us, but it's quite good flop for us. And so let's start with good flop, terrible turn. Well, the worst turn card in the deck here is probably going to be like an offsuit ace. So an offsuit ace, look at that. I mean, we're just playing a pure check. We now have 38% equity. So this falls into medium flop, good flop, I would say, and then awful turn. Extremely high check frequency, right? So now let's pick like a brick turn that would be a medium turn. So now we're going to be medium. That's going to be like an offsuit deuce. An offsuit deuce gives us some straights too, so we should be quite aggressive here, right? So it's not like the maybe not like the absolute best turn card in the deck for us, but it's a quite good turn for us. How about like an 8? Okay, so 8 and deuce are about the same in this kind of spot, which is cool. So let's look at our range. Let's start with, what about a 3? Is a 3 better? Yeah, there we go. Okay. So a 3 is even better because now we're turning even some offsuit straights with the 7-4. So essentially, as this turn gets better and better and better for us, we're developing more and more aggression. And in this kind of spot where it's 9-6-4 turn good for us, it's going to be a pretty clear spot where we have multiple parts of our range that are incentivized to bet, right? So on this deuce, we're seeing it's mostly big bet. We're mostly just betting a good 9x is worth quite a bit of chips. Even a 6x is going for this big bet size, right? And so our small bets on 9-6-4 deuce are coming from this 4 and deuce that are kind of putting out a block bet saying, hey, you have a ton of ace high. I have the equity advantage here. I'm going to develop some kind of block, small size bets, but mostly I'm going to focus on the portion of my range that I'm going to say is nutted. And at this stack depth, that's a 6 and better, essentially. And so when we can be quite aggressive now on this turn, then what does that mean for our hand choice? Well, our hand choice is going to reach further and further away from a great bluffing candidate to a kind of like whatever bluffing candidate. And what that's going to look like is if we look at like 8-7, 8-7 is a great bluffing candidate, right? We have a real amount of equity. Any 3 in our hand, any 5 in our hand, very aggressive strategies. And now as we get to like a bit of a worse candidate, this is going to be like a king 8 offsuit, queen 8 off, right? All we really have with these types of hands are a couple incentives. One, that we're cleaning up equity, we're folding out better king and queen highs, and we're gonna have a potential blocker on the river, which is that like medium card. So imagine like a 5 on the river. Now all of a sudden, all of our on a 5, all of our 3s get there. A lot of all of our 7-8 gets there, and some more straights and offsuit 2 pairs. And so now we need candidates that are going to be bluffing kind of on that super high EV run out for us. So that's kind of the point of grabbing these hands like the queen 3, queen 5 are very high frequency. And then hands like king 7, king 8, queen 8 are going to be a bit lower frequency. Let's naturally just move this to a spade. It's going to be a very similar strategy, but now all of a sudden we develop a bit more spade draws. And so in terms of simplifying in this kind of spot, on this spade, I'm just going to choose my worst bluff candidates when it has a spade in it. And I'm going to check mine ones without a spade in it pure. So even though that's not going to be like a perfect strategy, that's going to be how I build my ranges. And so why is that? Well, when I have king of spades 8, and I'm like, okay, my global frequency is quite high on this kind of turn, I need to be quite aggressive. I have a polarity advantage, as well as a little bit of like a single pair advantage that I'm pushing into for like that B60 and a little bit of block kind of size in my strategy. Well, the king of spades 8 is going to do great because it's blocking more continues, because they're going to continue with the king of spades in their hand more than they're not. And I'm also going to get to bluff spade rivers. So now all of a sudden I get to bluff pretty much like a 3, a 5, a 7, a 10, and a spade. And then I get to value bet on a king, right? So all of a sudden I have like pretty reasonable properties with this type of hand. So why don't we pick a turn that it's a bit more single size strategy, and I think that would be like a board pairing. So if we get like a board pairing diamond here, now all of a sudden it's like we don't really have that much incentive to like block or to even B60 anymore. Like we're still doing a little bit of B60, but in this spot, I'm going to play the spot pure pot and check. I'm saying I have a good 9, I have a 6, or I have a bluff. And what you're going to find again is that if we look at the diamond draws, all of these type of hands should be all diamonds, right? Look at that aggression we're building. I mean, this really goes back to the fact that it's like, okay, we have a mediocre we have a mediocre flop and a pretty decent turn. Where's our asymmetry? It's at the high end of our range. We have more nutted hands than our opponent, so we want to be betting at a medium frequency and a big size. And now we're at our hand choice. We grab our value hands and our best bluffing candidates, even up until our medium bluffing candidates here. So like a bad bluffing candidate is going to be something like Queen Jack of clubs, right? Queen Jack of clubs, just like it doesn't really have any good properties. We don't really have equity. We don't have any like potential blockers. And so these hands are not, it's not a good enough reason just to have Jack 10 of spades and be like, okay, well, I could have a 6. I could have a 6 and like I have 2 overcards to 9. It's not precise enough. we have to go through that kind of process that we're laying out for these turn probe spots and be very, very precise in our frequencies. Look at all this deuce X. It's a very clear trigger. When we have the diamonds, we go for the bet. When we don't, we go for the check. The other hand types that we're going to have here are going to be things with equity like the 8-7, the 7-5, the deuce 3. Yep, deuce 3 gets in there. And then as we move to the blocker type hands, the way I'm going to play my strategy is give me a diamond in my hand, I'm going to bet it pure. Without the diamond, I'm going to go for the check. Is that perfect GTO? No. But I don't trust myself to play perfect GTO at all times. I'm just trying to be as precise as humanly possible in these kind of spots. We look at the aces, which of the aces are going to be best. Ace of diamonds can mix at a low frequency. King of diamonds can mix at a low frequency. Same with these ones. Look at that diamond. It's just so, it seems so clear to me that the computers are kind of telling us that is what separates these spots in terms of controlling our frequencies and being precise. So I think that's a pretty cool example of like this medium spot. These are a little bit trickier. There's a lot more going on. There's a lot more at play in the kind of medium or medium bad or medium good spots than other parts of the game tree, essentially. So let's pick another spot. Let's go for really good for us now. So 9-6-4 is like quite mediocre. Let's go 7-4-3. So we have offsuit straights. We're developing a lead. It's so good for us. We have 47% equity. Okay, so ace jack 5, that 40 big blind spot, we had 33%. Now last hand on the 9-6-4, we had about 43%. And now we're talking about a spot where we have 47%. So this can be a great flop for us. If it goes check, check, what's a great turn for us? Well, great turn for us is going to give us a massive offsuit straight and 2-pair asymmetry. That's going to be like a 5 or 6. Just go with the 6 and look at that, right? Great flop for us, great turn for us, and we're finding almost 100% bets here. Almost 100% bets. So this is the complete opposite to that ace jack 5 turn 10, right? We have the worst case scenario and pretty much the best case scenario. And we see that is completely controlling our frequencies in these situations. So, I mean, you can just be so aggressive in these spots. One note I'll say is that in these spots when we're finding multiple turn sizes, if we think about our hand selection, right? The way that I sort out my frequencies is that the better the bluff candidate with multiple sizes is going to always fit into my bigger bet size. So a good bet candidate here for me would be an 8 with a diamond. Or sorry, 8 with a spade, my bad. So spade is the flush draw. I want to focus on a hand like jack 8 of spades. So jack 8 of spades for me, I get that there's mixing. I get that there's different things that are going on. But that hand for me is going to fit into a big bet size, whereas a slightly worse bluff candidate, I'm going to put into my kind of like block size. That's how I focus on my river strategies too. We'll get to that in the river section, but in general, the better the candidate is, the more I'm willing to put more money in the pot with it. And that's for a ton of reasons, but really the case is like I want to have equity against their continues. That's why we're betting a lot with equity, even when our global frequency is much lower. And so when I have equity, I'm okay putting more money in. Whereas when I have a hand like ace 2 off, right? Like I get to block here and force him to fold some equity. I was expecting him to fold some better ace X. Like his weakest ace X's are actually mixing here. So I guess we're really just like cleaning up equity and finding some board coverage on an ace river, I guess is somewhat possible here. But I mean, how much equity do we have when we have ace deuce? Like we're betting a hand with like a very marginal amount of equity here, which is interesting. It's just such a good flop and good turn for us that we're finding different sizes throughout. So what happens if we get that great flop and the bad turn? So I think that the worst turn in the deck is once again going to be that kind of ace, offsuit ace in particular. And we're finding that pure check even still. We just don't have enough equity. Now, as this gets lower and lower, finding some bets. What about like a 9? Now we're finding more aggression, right? We're pushing our asymmetry in the fact that we have like robust equity throughout our range. We have plenty of like medium strength single pair hands, and our opponents weighted towards more just like marginal ace high type stuff. Board pairing, we're going to see again. We're going to just be quite polar. Look at that. I mean, it's like, so I love when it's so clean like that, you know? So sometimes it's not always perfect. We're always talking in like kind of like fluid dynamics. I don't know if anybody took fluid dynamics, but fun class in school, and like we're always in this like kind of fluid process where like we're taking these concepts and it's allowing us to play quite good strategies, but we're still missing at some points, right? We're still a little bit off here and there, and we're improving our intuition and we're increasing our precision over and over and over every time we study like this. But man, it is beautiful when it's like, okay, this spot should be pot and check, and it just boom, just click, and it's like there's no small bets, there's none of this. It's just pot and check, and so you love to see that. So once again, that polar strategy, we hit that medium frequency, big bet size. As this turn is better and better for our equity, now we're at 55%. We have multiple asymmetries in our range. We're hitting a block size and a big size, and we're betting at a massively high frequency, right? And as the turn gets worse and worse for us, we're playing an extremely high check frequency. So that, you know, I don't want to get off too much on a tangent, but when we play this super high check frequency, if you've seen any of my classes on playing OOP as the aggressor, you'll see that like we constantly talk about how the more you check, the more hands you have to pull from to develop aggression against their bets. And that's kind of what happens on these spots like this, where the 7-5-4, we still have plenty of nutted hands, right? We have offsuit straights, offsuit two pair. We have tons of nutted high equity hands. But our overall range equity after check, we still have all this air. And the aces really improved our opponent's check back range. So what we do is we play check, they develop bets, say they go medium, and now we develop this check raise range, right? We develop this check raise range based off this 5-6 and this ace-7. And what hands are we pulling from? Well, we're pulling from our high equity draws. Like all of these kind of concepts are very connected throughout different parts of the game. And so look for that. When you're playing a very high check frequency, that allows you to play check raises. When you're playing a very high pot and check frequency, you're probably not going to play as many check raises, just because they're going to push your range is going to be full of like marginal type hands. So it's not going to lean it into as much aggression in that manner. So yeah, I hope that was clear. So we went through a really bad flop for us, a mediocre flop for us, and a great flop for us. And we could do this all day. I mean, I love this stuff. It keeps it's just so consistent. It's so consistent when we are simplifying this turn probe strategy and approaching our frequencies like this. So let's just maybe go through a few more. Let's go deeper stacked. Okay, so as you get deeper stacked, typically in turn probes, or for all spots really, you're developing less aggression. And the reason for that is that at deeper SPRs, you're at a bigger positional disadvantage. So you need to have the ability to defend that your passive ranges when the in-position player gets that ability to put in every single chip. So when you're playing like an 80 big blind spot, what's going to happen is your polarity advantage is going to need to be higher for you to want to put money in the pot. So let's just go with like, should we just redo that 9-6-4 spot? Essentially, at deeper stacks, the nut advantage matters more. And when you get spots, let's let it think for a second here. When you get spots at deeper stacks, the way I think about it is that I want to be betting my hands a little bit less often. So we see like 10-9, right? Jack-9, Queen-9, King-9. All these hands in this kind of spot at shallower depths are happy putting in all the money, right? But at 80 big blinds, we have to protect against board changing rivers a bit more frequently. And so we're still betting, but our size is moving a bit down. We don't need to like be playing as polar. And then we're finding a little bit more checking in general. let me just check this here. So that we're looking at hijack versus big blind at about a 40% check frequency. If we go to like 40, I know we did 25 already for this. We're talking 9, 6, 4, check, check, turn deuce. It's a very similar check frequency actually at 40. And then what happens if we move down to like 25? Raise call, 9, 6, 4. I expect 10-9 to just bet pretty much every time now. But we're going to have to see. It's more, right? But it's not crazy different. But what we're seeing is that it's betting more for a bigger size. So imagine we only allowed for the pot size bet to be used at 80 big blinds. Well, now 10-9-0 at 80 is going to check at a much higher frequency, right? Because intuitively it just doesn't want to put in as much money. It's not just going to like pot the turn and jam the river like you can off 25 big blinds. So in general, off deeper stacks, we need to be a little bit more respectful about board changing rivers, develop a little bit more I hate using the word balance in this kind of spot. We need to develop a little bit more of a robust checking strategy when we're out of position, and nut advantage matters a bit more. So in this spot, we have the nut advantage. I bet if we compare a spot where nut advantage is a bit more shared, it's probably going to be a little bit more clear. So let's go back to this hijack versus big blind spot. And what I want is a spot that we're not going to turn as many straights. So how about this 10-7-4? It should be a very polar, it's an extremely aggressive strategy at 80 from IP. I guess we are hijack. Okay, let's go 9-7-4 instead of 9-6-4. Why don't we look at a different board type actually? I know we've covered a lot of those. Let's do how about like Queen 7-6. This is going to be a really mixed strategy from the opponent. Although pretty heavy small bets. Jack 7-6. Okay, this is kind of what I'm looking for. Like more of a really mixed strategy from the opponent. There's a lot going on right away on the flop. When we play check check and we don't turn super nutted hands, we're just having to play reasonably passively. So I would say that this flop here, I would consider this to be like a medium bad board for us. We have 43%. This is quite similar in equity to the amount of equity we had on the 9-6-4. But when we're deep stacked in this spot, we're just at such a positional disadvantage that when we have a jack here after check check, we just can't go around piling all the money in like we can at 25 big blinds. So when you're turn probing at deeper stacks, you need to focus on increasing your check frequency overall, having slightly smaller turn probe sizes, because it's not like you can diminish the SPR. At 25 big blinds, you're potting with this nutted range because you can really diminish the SPR and jam the river. At 80 big blinds, you're playing a 12 SPR here. 12 SPR here at 80. So we need to develop aggression, but we don't want to be putting as much money into the pot from out of position. We want to be careful for board changing rivers, because imagine we just always pot a jack. Think about how many board changing rivers there are now. There's a club, a straight draw completer, a queen, king, or ace, right? When we're shallow or stacked, if we bet king jack here, queen jack, and the river comes the 3 of clubs, we just don't care, right? We're playing a 1 SPR on the river, we're just all in for value, right? And so that's the one thing I'll say about stack depth is increase your passive frequencies and look to put less money into the pot on average. The rest of the concepts still apply. We're just moving the goalposts a little bit, right? It's just that in those spots that are great for us, we're not developing as much aggression. Or same with the size, right? If we look like a 3 here, a 3 does give us these new nutted hands, right? And so we are playing some big sizes, but it's not enough to like really want to bet kind of our uglier bluff candidates. Our uglier bluff candidates go way down in value as frequency of betting goes down, our global frequency, and as stack depth increases. We really, as stack depth increases, must have equity. Because we can find those like blocker type hands in stuff that still just has a bit more equity, like this ace 5, ace 4. Whereas like just having this king 8 off now, like It just isn't really good enough. Even though it's going to turn into a blocker on a 5 or 9, when we're this deep of stacked, we just don't really reach into those kind of hands because our overall global check frequency is much higher. So I hope that that was clear. I like this node. I really like the spot. I think it's super interesting to play, and I encourage you to like test yourself in this spot. Go through this process. Go through the simplification process where you're classifying the flop and you're classifying the turn. You're looking to solve how much you want to be betting. What is your global frequency and size, and then build your range from there. If you can get in the habit of doing that, you're going to massively increase your precision in turn probe spots. So thanks so much. Looking forward to the next video.